Hello, SketchUp partner. Thanks for joining today's session. We're very excited to be able to present and demonstrate some of the fantastic new features set for the release of SketchUp Pro 2018. Joining me today in the webinar, we have Josh Riley, Aaron Dietzen, who are both sales engineers based out of SketchUp HQ in Boulder. We also have Sandra Winstead, who is part of the product development team. As always, there are many small improvements across the board that go into making our products more stable and user-friendly. But today the team will be presenting only the major new features of SketchUp Pro and the Layout Client apps. Beyond what we're presenting today, we will also soon be sharing with you a partner reference guide. This includes details of further product releases and some important information for the year to come. If you have any questions, we will have some time at the end. And if you're listening to the recording, please send any questions to richard@sketchup.com. So I'd just like to make it clear that this is kind of an indication of what features may be in the next release. It's what we plan to put in. But of course, there is no obligation on our part to deliver. Okay, so just before we start, a couple of rules. I request that anybody on the call does not share any of the information that we're presenting now, and also does not publish it until you're permitted to do so. Don't publish anything until everybody has the green light, which will come either from myself or from your distributor via email. The best way to get to know the software is, of course, to get the beta. So if you're interested in getting the beta, please do let me know. Just send an email and we'll get you set up on the beta program. The scheduled release date is going to be the 7th of November. Of course, that's subject to change, and we will provide notification to partners pre 24 hours in advance of that, just to confirm that everybody is good to launch. And between now and then, we'll be sharing with you the marketing assets to help you build campaigns. So that's email campaigns and web content. I hear you say, why aren't you showing me what's in SketchUp 2018 already? So I'll kick it off. I'm going to hand over to Aaron first. Yeah.
There we go. All right. Hello. This is Aaron, and we're going to start by taking a look at the stuff that is new in SketchUp 2018. Josh is going to come in with some layout stuff after this. So one of the first things that we have here is advanced attributes. So I don't know how much you all have seen what we have in as far as attributes in standard SketchUp. Generally, to add attributes or just general information outside of the IFC information, we've required users to create dynamic components and create their own user-defined attributes. Starting in 2018, any item I pick will always have a set of 5 standard attributes. These are labeled price, size, URL, owner, and status. So every single component that is created will automatically have these values. They can enter names for any of these values right from inside the entity info window. This is great because, like I said, it saves users several steps if they want to add that information. They can just click and put it in, rather than before they would have to actually go through, create a dynamic component, and then populate that manually. This has worked kind of nice with some enhancements in generate report. So I have a model up here that's made of a bunch of different pieces. They don't really mean anything. I kind of made up names and values for them, but just to kind of see how this works, in generate report, it runs the same way it did before. But if I come in here, I'm going to edit my report. We have this additional box right up here, which is group by. So if I go ahead, I'm going to just put this entity name back down here and run this report. This is what our reports would look like before. Every item gets its own line, even if there's the same thing. So here I have this dome nut a bunch of times, and you can see it's just listed once each. There is no consolidation. So one of the new features of the new generate report is group by. So if I group by entity name and run this exact same report, and see what happens here is I get consolidation. So if I look at the quantity over here, I can see that some of these are actually grouped together. Here's that same dome nut is actually in there 18 times, and it'll actually go through and consolidate those together based on whatever value you want. In this case, I consolidated by the name. So this is nice. Our previous solution for this was export a file, a CSV file or something like that, and bring it into Excel and consolidate or make whatever changes you want. In this case, they can actually do that sort of consolidation on the fly when running Generate Report, which is great. The other thing to note is these values that I was talking about, these attributes over here, they automatically show up as reportable or consolidatable values in Generate Report. They'll also export into the IFC file. So if somebody generates an IFC file for BIM interaction with other programs, something like that, those values will actually go along for the ride automatically. Another big thing, and this is a more fun one to look at. Generate Report's great. It's good for especially people who like numbers and things like that. But for those of us who are more visually minded, we have an enhancement in section planes. First and foremost, when I hit section plane, it's going to come up and ask me for a name and a symbol. This is important because section planes actually show up as entities in the outliner now. So where before you'd have your section planes and the only way to really deal with them would be to toggle them on and off and enable and disable them, they'll actually show up in the outliner by this name right here. So I'm going to leave this one called section 3. You also notice that there's a symbol right here. Let me show you what happens when I place it. I go ahead and just place it vertically, and I can see right here it actually calls it section 3. This is great. This value goes along with this section plane. Any place I see this plane, I'll actually see it called out as 3. Additionally, if I come over to my outliner over here and scroll down, you can see it's alphanumeric. Another change that we made to the outliner is better organization of the items in the outliner. And I can see here under S is section. So I can actually come use the outliner to select this plane. When I select it, the other really neat thing shows up there. You can see that I actually as I'm cutting through here, I'm actually filling in the surfaces of this section. If I come in here to edit my styles, I actually have the option of filling my section planes. This is really cool. This is something that was only doable by a bunch of extra work in SketchUp, by making section cuts and manually filling them in, or by using an extension or something like that. In this case, I can simply turn my section fills on. I can do things like set the properties. What is the section line going to look like? So I can change that color. I can actually change my fill color too. And then that will actually go in and create that cut. So it actually creates surfaces. It's important to note these aren't actual surfaces. This is kind of a display artifact. It's laid in over top, but it does make it a lot easier to read section planes, especially with complex situations like this. Another thing to note is that these section planes actually help to speed up SketchUp. When a model is cut by a section plane, it actually doesn't bother rendering the invisible section. It sounds kind of silly, but what we used to do is actually go through and draw or account for the invisible section that was cut off by a section plane. Now we actually optimize the model so that if it's cut off by a section plane, we don't render it at all. So this means on a big model, somebody could use section planes to chop off the section they're not working with and speed up working with just a portion of the model. We have a couple other items, kind of just little things. One is native support for STL files. If you work with anybody who works with 3D printing or anything like that, STL files are a common file to import and export. SketchUp 2018 natively supports importing and exporting those files, so I can come up File and go right to Export 3D Model, and one of my options there is STL file. I do have the option of choosing how I want to do that. Is it only the current selection? Is it the entire model? File format units for the receiving program. Another option, or another new feature is with rectangles. This is just kind of a cool little one. Rectangles used to always be drawn corner to corner, but now I can actually hold down the modifier key, the option key, and draw them from the center. It's kind of a nice user interface, makes rectangles more like the other polygons that are drawn in SketchUp. And finally, this is something that you may or may not already be noticing. I am currently on the Mac version, and I don't know if you guys noticed, but I have these nice smooth lines. We have actually added anti-aliasing to the Mac version. It's not just a Windows thing anymore. Now Mac gets nice smooth lines and anti-aliasing just like we had in the Windows version. So that's a high-level overview of the big features available in 2018. Of course, we did some other cleanup stuff and, you know, made SketchUp run better as we try to do with every release. But those are the major features that your customers are going to be seeing. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Rich, who's going to pass it off to Josh for some layout.
All right, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about layout. And the first thing I want to show here is scale drawing in layout. And it's important to note here that you actually have a new panel in layout now. So up in the top here, you can see here this scale drawing in the upper right here. That's an entirely new panel in layout. And what we can do here is start drawing at a certain scale in layout, which is pretty useful because a lot of times you may want to draw in layout without using any kind of SketchUp model that you might be tracing over, or you actually can do that as well. So I've got a SketchUp model elevation here. It's a SketchUp viewport. And if I want to start doing a scale drawing, I click this button, and you'll see it'll let me know I should choose a scale first. In this case, I'm going to show an example real quick where I draw over the top of a SketchUp viewport here. So the scale I'm going to choose, I'm going to match my SketchUp viewport. I know this is a 1/2 inch equals a foot. So before I start drawing, I'm going to choose my scale, 1/2 inch equals a foot, and I'll go right to my line tool. And in this case, I'm going to use the snaps that I can access in my SketchUp viewport there. So I can snap to that point there. Notice here that I am drawing at a specific scale here. So if I type in a real world dimension, let's say I know this door opening is 6'8" tall, you can see that it's going to be drawn to scale there. Or if I want to just use some of the snaps in my SketchUp viewport, I can do that. Also, I could start this drawing totally from scratch. So I'm going to escape out of that, zoom out a little bit, and let's actually just move this over to the side. So this is a totally separate 2D line work that's not really attached to that SketchUp viewport there. I just wanted to show how you could kind of start matching that scale if you needed to add something to a SketchUp viewport. But of course, you can draw this stuff totally on its own off here to the side, and you can see that it's sort of its own group here. So if I double click, I can get inside this scaled group, and let's jump back outside of that group, and let's change the scale now, so I can actually change the scale afterwards. Let's go to something like 3/4 of an inch equals a foot. And you can see here, if I maybe throw a dimension on this, if I have, let me open up my dimension panel real quick. If I have this auto scale on, you'll notice that the dimension will kind of pick up the scale of that scale drawing group there. So it is 6'8" there. If I double click into this scaled group, let's draw that line again, just to show you that even though I changed my scale, I'm working in real world dimensions, and there's that 6'8" line. So I can change that scale and just keep thinking in my real world one-to-one dimensions. So just to recap that real quick, these scale drawings, you can do them totally on their own off to the side, or maybe in conjunction with a SketchUp viewport or existing stuff on the page. And also some real quick things that are small additions, but they're kind of nice because they match how SketchUp works. Let's say I draw two entities here, and I'll select them both and kind of put them in their own group. I can right-click, make group. And just like SketchUp, if I double-click, I can go inside this group and access these items. And also like SketchUp, if I go to View, Group, Edit, I can hide the rest of the document, which you may recognize from SketchUp, where you can hide the rest of the model. And I tied that to a shortcut, so if I just tap I'm going to use H in this case. So that's just like SketchUp. I can hide the rest of the model or hide the rest of the document in Layout's case. Also, I can lock groups just by a quick right-click lock. Also, like SketchUp, you may want to use this for things like this SketchUp viewport here. This is actually a 3D model, perspectives turned off, looking at an elevation. And a lot of times, those of you that have used Layout know that it's kind of a bummer to accidentally click into a viewport. So I could right click on my viewport and lock the SketchUp viewport so that now whenever I'm kind of clicking around here, I don't actually move that viewport around. You can see it turns red there, so I can't actually affect that viewport until I then go back in, just like SketchUp, and right click and unlock it. So that's pretty handy. It's nice to make things in layout work just like they do in SketchUp. It's good for discoverability. And one last note on the locking the group thing. Previously, you had to use layers a little bit more carefully to kind of navigate that. So locking is just a little bit faster way to deal with that and be more organized. This next page just has a few more examples of just some drawings that were created in layout with these tools. You can see here if I right click, I can change the scale. And this information is also accessible up in that panel I mentioned earlier. Here's that scale selection box there. Let's talk about the drawing tool improvements. Now these are pretty important because these are what allow us to use the new scale drawing feature. There's a lot of improvements. I'm not going to go through them all. The information that Richard will provide will go into more detail there, but I'll do a few of these. You can read through what's on the screen here or kind of watch what I'm doing. If I go to the arc tool, some pretty quick things here. You can see these arc colors and inferences here. I'll draw a line segment here. Let's erase some of this and show you that you can double click inside this group, and you can do some pretty fun things with these lines here. I can delete some segments or some nodes there. I can add them back in. Could also double click and move an entire segment on its own. So you have a lot of control with how you draw in layout, which is pretty important if you're trying to draw some more precise scale drawings in layout. But this stuff is good to read through later on your own and kind of get familiar with all the different small improvements that have been added. Also, a big one is DWG import. It's actually going to be in the file insert menu there. But this is really important because a lot of people that are using layout need to import DWG drawings for a lot of reasons. You might have consultants or colleagues that are creating these files, and anybody that has used layout knows that it's actually really nice to have this now. You can do a lot of things with files that you couldn't before. A pretty simple one is recreating title blocks. It's a pretty nice one to be able to do, just to transfer a title block that's in DWG format, bring it into layout. Opens up layout to the world of free DWG libraries. Let me pull in a file here. I'll go to File, Insert, and I'll bring this file in twice to show you two different ways we can bring it in. So when I bring it in, I'm prompted to choose paper space or model space. I'm going to keep it on paper space first, and I'll throw that down in the corner, and we'll bring in that same file with model space selected. So depending on the DWG that you have, you may want to choose a certain option here based on what you're trying to bring in. If you've used AutoCAD before, this might be familiar terminology to you. If you haven't, you could think of paper space kind of like layout is to SketchUp, where model space is sort of SketchUp space in AutoCAD's terms. So I'll bring this in like that. You can see it's similar stuff here, but I've got more survey lines coming in with this one. What's pretty nice about how this comes into layout is if I double click into this scaled group, you can see it is at a scale, and I kind of click around based on the layer structure in the DWG file. We have some grouping here. So you can see that this tree group, or the layers in this file, are grouped together according to layers. So I can kind of pull stuff apart. I can more easily kind of inspect and utilize this file based on that. So basically what's happening here is we have a closer representation of this DWG file compared to the way that SketchUp might import if you've used SketchUp to import a DWG. So that's a good thing to compare if you're poking around in these new features. We've also improved the DWG exporter. There's more information on that in the stuff that Rich will provide. And let's move on to the next one here. Not going to spend a lot of time on this one, but it's pretty simple. You can see here I've got multi viewports here. There's two viewports here, and I can dimension across them. So this is an entirely separate viewport. And not only that, but the dimensions are more precise now. They match the precision of SketchUp dimensions, which is nice to have. And the last page here, you saw Aaron mention earlier the attributes you can add to components in SketchUp. And in layout, we can actually utilize those pretty easily. So if I use this label tool here and I click on a component in the model, you can see that I have a drop down to access the attributes that, in this case, Aaron has created. I could choose the price there, click away, and that's part of the label. I could go click maybe the component instance name. So let's go here and choose that. And it will remember your last choice there. So if I want to be a little bit quick about this, I can kind of click away quickly, and I get the names there. So it could be pretty fast to label things if you are very organized in the way that you are creating those components. So it's another reason to be careful and organized in SketchUp, because that stuff is easily accessible in layout. And I believe that's the last thing I wanted to talk about.
We don't have slides for this, but there have been changes to the API. The big one being that there's actually a way to generate layout files from SketchUp via the API. So extension makers can actually automatically or quickly generate layout files, which is something new. So that's also available.
Following the webinar, what I'll do is I will distribute a partner reference guide. So what that's going to do, it's kind of going to cover all aspects or most of the aspects of the launch of SketchUp Pro 2018. The new features, some features that weren't covered here, kind of like small fixes and improvements and so on. It will also cover things like make end of life. We did cover this a little bit at BizCamp for those that were there, but it explains a little bit more behind what's going on. A couple of launches in mixed reality and virtual reality that are coming in Q4. And following that as well, we will send out marketing copy, same as last year. So that is copy that can be used on your websites, localized, and for email and that kind of thing, as well as imagery, so updated imagery. So what I'll do now is I'll open it out to the floor. It might get a bit noisy, so I could ask, if you're not asking a question, maybe mute your mic or try to keep quiet. So what I'm going to do there is, obviously, there's a lot going on, there's too much noise. I'm going to mute everybody. If you have any questions, please just send them via email, and what I'll do is liaise with Josh and Aaron, and we will answer them directly. So a big thank you there to Josh and Aaron and Sandra for putting that presentation together for us. Very much appreciated. I hope you all found it useful. So thank you guys for attending, and goodbye.